Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that influenced her the most on her life journey is best-selling author and internationally exhibited artist and teacher, KAREN Kinney. A mystic and guide at her core who channels wisdom through her creative work, KAREN Kinney has pursued a multifaceted art career. Her work resides in numerous private collections, including those of Stanford University and actor Bob Odenkirk and NPR's Guy Raz. Her art was purchased for the Lionsgate film The Lincoln Lawyer, and she's designed installation work for the Los Angeles International Airport and painted murals in LA and Mexico. And KAREN is also the author of 2 books, The Reluctant Artist, Navigating and Sustaining a Creative Path, and the recently released Doorways to Transformation, Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul. KAREN Kinney, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. I'm really glad to be here.
So let's talk about your relationship with books. I mean, like many of us, you've said that for you, they were a place that you could escape to, especially fiction in your childhood. But of course, as you grew up, you turned more towards self-help, personal development categories, which are not exactly places to escape to, but certainly to learn from. So, tell us a little bit about some of the books that inspire you the most before we get into the ones that are the 10 best.
Yeah, sure. You're right. I mean, self-help and transformation is not a place to escape. It's more a place to find oneself. And so I think for me, a big part of my fascination with books and interest in them is growing spiritually, obviously, growing in authenticity. That's a value that's very important to me. So yeah, I think those are the books I'm drawn to, the books that, that shift some kind of paradigm for me. That's what really excites me. I'm excited by expansion and challenging my own thinking and where are my own limits and blind spots. So finding books that give me those like aha moments is fun. I'm motivated to do that.
Yeah, it's those moments where the brain stops and there's that temporary gap while you're trying to take something in, and then you go, oh my. Yeah, my kind of books too.
Yeah. I figure since the universe is always expanding, we live in this infinite, kind of cosmos. Why not go along with that if we can? So books.
So what criteria did you use to come up with your 10 best?
Yeah. Well, that was challenging, because there's so many books out there that are excellent. And so for me, I kind of used, more recent history as a guide, and recent meaning like in the past decade or 10 to 12 years. I kind of, with the exception of a few, there's a couple on the list that kind of left a very significant mark on me early in my life. And so I included those. But other than those couple, the rest were in the past 10 to 12 years, books that I both felt some kind of emotional connection to, and also that really shifted, again, my own way of thinking, and shifted my thinking in deep enough way that it led to me changing how I show up in the world. To me, that's the most impactful book. If it just stays in our head, it's like, oh, okay, that's nice, but doesn't actually lead, the idea of transformation. So books that really shifted my way of being or dropped in some kind of like healing tool for addressing something that needed to be addressed in me. And I'd say almost all the books led me to kind of a deeper understanding and embracing of who I'm meant to be in the world, or my sense of dharma or vocation. And so that's, that was definitely an asset of all the books on the list.
Mm. So let's start with the list. And your first one is a seminal book on creativity that became a seminal book on your creative journey. And
Yeah.
probably not just you, many, many others too. And the book is The Artist's Way, A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity by Julia Cameron, which was published in 1992. My God, that book is still inspiring people.
It still is. It's pretty much the Bible for
Yes.
creative, I would call it. Yeah. So yeah, definitely that book, as with so many other people, had a major impact on me. And it really, the timing of it entering my life was perfect. It was right when I was, I used to be a social worker. And towards the end of that time, when I was realizing, I don't think this is quite the right path, and I'm creative, but I don't really know what that looks like or what that is, this book came into my life. And it's interesting because it came indirectly via my family. My mother, a long time ago, had given that book to my husband, thinking he might enjoy reading it or it's something that would be fitting for him. And he, after looking at it, said, "You know what? I think you need to be reading this book," to me. And I'd say I went through it once on my own, and then I led a group of people through it. And so going through it a couple different times, it really helped me in my whole process of letting go of what I had, studied to do officially, and daring to entertain this idea of creativity and embracing my own creativity. And it helped me. She's really good at just helping you unpack what are your subconscious, maybe judgments you have around creative people or the creative work, all of that, and certainly cultural judgments that you adopt without even knowing. So yeah, she has a very nurturing and feminine voice with regards to creativity, and I appreciate that.
I mean, that was such a huge transition, one that many, many people would like to make, but hesitate. So,
Mhm.
what wisdom can you share with people about,
Mhm.
crossing that gap, which is
Mm.
huge?
It is huge, yeah. I'd say the number one thing I would say is you need to cultivate some kind of intrinsic value around your creativity. Because I think a lot of times what keeps people stuck is, besides not knowing just pragmatically how to go there, is they attach kind of the value of whatever they want to do with an external goal or an external reward or an external reception of their work, whatever it is. And so I think if you're always kind of waiting, it's really about validation. If you're always waiting for the external world to validate you, it's going to be very hard to move forward, or you're going to be changing your subsets of people you hang out with frequently, to find that validation. So I think the more you can really honor and come to know for yourself that your own creative expression has value, regardless of it, external outcome, that helps, because there's lots of days, external outcomes can be great, but there's plenty of days where there is not one, and we certainly can't control them. So I think that giving your own creative instincts intrinsic value, I'd say, is a key to helping you just become a bit more free, and then dare to maybe take one step, tiny step, and then another one. Mhm.
I know certainly, as a writer, so many people I've met have said, I can't call myself a writer.
Mhm.
I don't know what I need to do to be able to claim, that title.
Yeah.
Many think it's when they get their first commissioned, their first commission.
Yeah.
When they get paid to write, then they've earned the right to call
No.
themselves a writer. Did
Mhm.
you feel that?
Sure. Yeah, I felt both that with both art, being an artist, calling myself an artist, and now a writer.
Mm,
And yeah, it's definitely a journey. I think that looks different for everyone, but and I think it's okay to have some of these external markers, like, oh, when I get paid for this piece of writing, or for me, it was, oh, when I'm in my first gallery show, that's what artists do, and that, and so I think being gentle with ourselves on that journey is important. That was important for me, because sometimes I expected, when I knew, like, okay, now I'm going to become an artist, or now I'm going to become a writer, I had some of this expectation it will, happen instantly, or at least my acceptance and embodying of it will be instant. Well, we don't embody anything instantly. So I think a key for me is to be gentle with my process, and to live into it. There's no way around the living into it, and that's hard, because people want like a hard and fast answer or a clear directive, and life isn't that way. But I think it's a journey, and some of that will come from, external things we engage in, and a lot of it will be just internal. I include a quote actually in my newest book from Toni Morrison, and I think that's who it was. Anyway, she had said that she could not bring herself to call herself a writer until she'd written like 4 books or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. So there you go. It just everyone, I think, experiences that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So book number 2 on your list is The War of Art, Winning the Inner Creative Battle by Steven Pressfield, which was published in 2002.
Yeah. So this book was an interesting contrast to Julia Cameron's, mostly because it was a much more obviously masculine approach, being written by Steven Pressfield, to creativity. But what I liked about his book is that there were 2 things that really stood out to me. One, he really emphasized the dailiness of showing up to do your work, so regardless of your circumstances or how you feel on any given day, or some of these more kind of ambiguous states of being, there is something about the discipline with anything of just being willing to show up, and I will show up to create, who knows what will come out, but I'll at least dedicate the time. So I appreciated his book for that, because it emphasizes the regularity of creating. But I also liked, he talks a lot about resistance, the idea of, when we feel resistance to our work, or these inner barriers to embracing it. And something I've always remembered from what he wrote is he mentioned something that about resistance being kind of aligned with what we're actually meant to be doing. So sometimes the greater levels of resistance we feel towards a particular project or calling or endeavor is an indication that we're actually getting all the more aligned with what we're actually meant to be doing in the world. So I liked his spin on that, because it helps me in my life kind of embrace resistance. It's not always just, I've just got to get over this resistance, but when it crops up, and especially when it's an intense feeling of resistance, to think, oh, okay, is this possibly because I'm actually really called to be doing this particular thing, and I'm that much more in line with my sense of dharma, or vocation, or what wants to be birthed through me. So it was kind of a more positive way to look at resistance, as a clue that, oh, maybe I'm really tackling what I'm meant to be tackling, and hence these resistance feelings are coming up. So I appreciated that.
Book 3 was Julia Cameron said it was a fuse lighter. And, the writing guru Peter Elbow said, the wisest teacher of writing I know. And they're talking about Pat Schneider, and the book is How the Light Gets In, Writing as a Spiritual Practice. That's fairly recent, 2013. Mm-hmm. When did it come into your life?
So someone gave me this book shortly before I moved to Mexico. I moved to Mexico from Los Angeles in 2018. And it ended up being really timely, because one of my goals, for myself, back to this embracing of identity, when I moved to Mexico, I was like, I'm going to become a writer. That's my goal, whatever that means. And someone had given me this book. And what I liked about this book is that it talks a lot about the spiritual practice of writing. And for me, creativity has always been kind of first and foremost a spiritual expression. And I very much feel like a channel that receives things and then expresses them. And so that's how I have approached my creative expression. And so what Pat did is, I think, really affirm this whole idea of being, I'll call it like a contemplative creator, in the sense of learning to grow still and listen and receive messages, and then channel that into my work somehow. And I think for me, that's naturally who I am. Like, stillness is actually something I enjoy doing, and it comes easily in terms of my personality. But what's challenging for me is allowing myself to be this kind of contemplative creator, just because of the world we live in that emphasizes, speed and quick results and bigger and better, and all these concepts that don't necessarily mesh with stillness and allowing. But I know for myself, some of the things I'm happiest with when I create come from those deepest places, but you can't access those deep places unless you're still and learn how to listen and all of that. And so her book, I think, for me, just really affirmed this whole idea of, in her case, she's talking about writing, but I'll say the creative process being a spiritual practice, and yeah, just again, I think it was another one of those books that gave me permission to continue to come into and embrace the fullness of who I am and not judge it because it doesn't match a certain cultural norm, and I'll say like an American cultural norm. So, yeah.
Book number 4 is an interesting one. Boundaries. When to say yes, when to say no, to take control of your life, by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, published in 1992.
Yes, this book was given to me by a family friend, and this is one of the books on my list that came into my life early. I was 19 when I read this book, and it really came at a very foundational time, given that I was so young, because I'm both an empath and an HSP. It's a highly sensitive person. And so both those types of people are very generally very in tune with other people's energies, other people's needs, all of this. So if you couple those characteristics with the fact that I studied social work in school, which again is a more emphasis on those around me, and I was raised in the church, and in the church, there was a lot of teaching around, being selfless and kind of denying yourself, putting others ahead of you. And that was kind of the most spiritual path. That was very elevated spiritual path. So all those factors converging meant that I really had very little awareness of myself, almost none. So this book was really important in that it gave me, again, back to permission, but it taught things that at the time I thought, is that really true? Is it okay to actually put your own needs first, or to take care of yourself before, attending to others, and all these things that now seem quite basic. And well, of course that's okay. But I think at 19, I didn't have an understanding of that. So I'm really grateful I read it when I did, because the timing of, being earlier in my development was important. And I think, again, just gave me permission to hopefully walk a healthier path through life, and to not have it be derailed by some kind of like outsized awareness of others with an underdeveloped awareness of myself. So that's, I think, what this book gave me permission to do, is to develop my own self and create the boundaries that I needed to do that.
And from what I understand, this book was really written for the religious community.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And that's another reason why I think it spoke to me, because like I said, I was raised in the church. And so at the time when this family friend had given it to me, the authors were speaking from that cultural paradigm. So that was helpful, because they were saying things that at the time felt like slightly countering this, that I had been taught. So that's another reason it had that impact for me, because they came from a cultural background where they were speaking the same language that I had been raised in.
Book number 5, a much loved author, When the Heart Waits, Spiritual Direction for Life's Sacred Questions, Sue Monk Kidd. And that one was published in 1990. She's the author of The Secret Life of Bees, for those who don't know.
Yeah, I love Sue Monk Kidd. I've read not all of her books, but many of her books. And this book was really helpful for giving instruction on kind of going through a darker period in life. So it came to me at a time when I was going through a darker period. I was in the midst of transitioning work, moving from social work to a creative field, but I'd also recently had an injury at a job that forced me to quit. So I was unemployed, and the injury involved my wrists and my hands. So I couldn't actually use my hands even on the computer. It was too painful to use them. I couldn't certainly make anything. So it was a difficult time personally. And it was also this kind of transition period I was in, and that required waiting and being in the unknown and all these things that aren't fun necessarily. And so Sue Monk Kidd, in this book, she writes about some of her own painful transitions and kind of being in spaces in her life that were periods of the unknown or periods of darkness, and how you go through those times. And, she often used the metaphor of like the chrysalis, right? The caterpillar before it becomes a butterfly, and it's encased in this chrysalis, and how, while on the surface, that looks like an uncomfortable and painful thing to be in, that a lot of obviously profound things are happening underneath the surface. And so her book was it was kind of like a dear friend coming along and saying, it's going to be okay. And also, here are some signs of hope for you in this kind of cocoon period you find yourself in. So Yeah, it was, it really spoke encouragement to me in that season of my life.
Book number 6, The Great Work of Your Life, A Guide for the Journey to Your True Calling by Stephen Cope.
Yeah, I love this book by Stephen Cope. It's probably it's on the list of one of my top favorite books, just because it was so helpful. He writes about the whole concept of Dharma and what is that and how do you find your Dharma and what does it mean to live it. And this book, the way he organizes it, he has a lot of personal stories, and it's like every other chapter will be someone who is just a regular everyday person whose story he's telling, followed by a chapter with someone who's well known, that everyone would know who that person is, and in each chapter talking about the person's particular dharma and their own life journey and how they were living it out or not. And he just explains the whole concept very well, and also illustrates how many people come very close to their dharma, or maybe spend most of their lives living just at the brink of it because they really want to be living it, but they are maybe not even aware that they're meant to dive in more fully. And so stay, for example, again, back to creative work, for someone who might want to be an artist, perhaps they become a curator at a gallery, or that would be an example of like, oh, they're very close to like actually what they're truly meant to be doing. And he talks about why that is, and how, and again, just really illustrates well the importance and value of really uncovering who you're meant to be and living it, because it's from that place that we're most powerful. And that a lot of times when we're trying to live someone else's path, even if we're successful at someone else's path, it's not going to have the impact in the world, and if that living our own truest path would have. So yeah, I think it's an excellent guide, and it's very well written.
It's it's something that we should cultivate in children very early on, that their life is a great work. And if they start with that in mind, perhaps more people would feel that they can open up and really embrace what they want rather than what they think they should.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It'd be great if that could be instilled more deeply. I mean, childhood's so foundational for all that. But I think it's, in that window as a child, it's when we're perhaps closest to knowing who we are before all the other judgments come in.
One thing I've learned through, I kind of knew it because I get to talk to so many people, but it's become especially apparent to me over the course of doing these interviews that everyone I speak to, whether they're well known or not, when they start telling you about their life, the path and the influences, it's all, every single one of them you would call, just a great work of art.
Yes. No, I'm sure you get a good window into seeing that over many people's journeys. Yeah, it's fascinating, and how our lives often end up trying to guide us on the path if we can just recognize some of the signs.
Yeah. Well, book number 7, this is an interesting one. I wasn't expecting to see this on your list, but The Wisdom of the Enneagram, The Complete Guide to Psychological and Spiritual Growth for the 9 Personality Types by Don Richard Rizzo and Russ Hudson. And this was published in 1999.
Yeah, this book, I'd say it's one of my favorites in terms of the psychological profiling type category books, which I've read many of. But yeah, it gives a very thorough understanding of the 9 personality types for those who aren't familiar with it. And we all embody all 9 of the types, but we tend to gravitate towards one of the types that they identify. And so I'm a Enneagram 4. The 4 is often, people who are creative often identify with that number. But what this book, it was very helpful for me in learning how to not just embrace the gifts of creating, but also how to grow and overcome some of the challenges associated with creating, whether that's, feeling things very intensely, or not always feeling like you belong in certain places, or, wanting to be understood by those around you, but yet you have this kind of unique path you're called to take. And so I'd say it helped go a lot deeper than I'd say your average personality profile does, for me anyway. And it also really helped me, frankly, understand people around me that I'm in close relationship with better. And, I think people, no matter how different we are, I think if you can at least understand what drives them, like what are this book looks at, like what are the key drivers for each personality type, what's really motivating them, that helps me tremendously just give grace to someone. For example, that might be like, I want to pull my hair out or whatever if I'm irritated by something. But if I can understand what's actually beneath the behavior, it helps a lot. So this book was really great for that. It just taking a deeper dive into how people are wired and and really celebrating the differences again, which I appreciated. It's not like certain numbers are preferred or something. It's like every number comes with their gifts and then with their challenges. So it gave a really helpful look at that in a just kind of deeper, more nuanced way.
It's described as the first definitive guide to using the wisdom of the Enneagram for spiritual and psychological growth. How do you think it aided your spiritual growth?
I think it aided my spiritual growth in terms of helping me identify like key ways to operate in my higher self, I'll call it, as opposed to my lower self. So in its description of the numbers, it talks about some of the, like I said, the base urges or instincts or the lower self needs that drive the behavior of the personality type. And then it talks about ways those things, when you're operating in a healthy state, how those things get transformed. And so an example for me would be, instead of getting kind of caught in some downward spiral, say a downward feeling spiral, for example, because I feel things very deeply as a creative person, and then getting kind of immobilized and not able to function. And then, that would be kind of a lower state of the Enneagram 4. How can I channel that instead into like being healthily detached from kind of these feeling waves and using kind of the creative impulses I have to create a work of art that could move other people. And so I think just moving from the lower self to the higher self, it gives a lot of helpful tools for doing that.
Book number 8 is one that's caused quite a lot of comment. Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, by Susan Cain. This was published in 2012, and this is kind of almost created a movement.
Is almost what?
Created a movement.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, I resisted this book for a long time because I am an introvert. So for a long time, I thought, wow, why do I need to read a book on introversion? I'm well acquainted with introversion, But so it was only fairly recently, maybe 6 years ago, I think, I decided, okay, I'll give this book a try. And I'm so glad I did, because it's such a well-researched book, extremely well-researched, and very helpful at just understanding not only the kind of extroverted ideal we're born into, and I should say again, with the US, not all countries are that way, but the US certainly is, in terms of valuing it. What it values is extroversion and those qualities that go with it. And so understanding that historically, she outlines that, how that came to happen in the US in particular. But then just all her research on the strengths of introversion and key people who have, she highlights, who have made valuable contributions to society, but done so in their introverted way. It was very helpful for me valuing the gifts of introversion. Because again, if I grew up in Asia, well, I wouldn't need to read this book. Like, the gifts of introversion are quite valued. But I think being in the US, and especially as a creative person, I'm an introverted one, and I tend to be more reflective, and I'm kind of a deep ponderer of things. And I'm not quick to like jump up and speak and, wave my flag for my own self. But those are key things to do in America if you're wanting to, get people's attention or, quote, succeed and all of that. So it really, again, just, I think, reaffirmed that the values of introversion, the values of how they work, and again, gave me permission to kind of do that with my own creative work. And in terms of how I want to share my work with the world, I think all creative people want to share their work with the world, but there's so many ways to do that. And so I think her book just shone a spotlight on the ways of introverts, and she deemed them valuable. And again, I think that's a really helpful contribution, I think, to that arena.
Yeah, absolutely. Book number 9, Sue Monk Kidd's acclaimed spiritual memoir, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. What was it about this book that you loved so much?
Well, this book met me kind of exactly where I was on my journey of when I read it, of exploring kind of the divine feminine and the feminine face of God and all those concepts. So this is maybe I'd say about a decade or maybe 12 years ago when I was beginning this journey. And so this book, she writes about her own journey. She was raised in a very fundamentalist, conservative Christian background. And she writes about her journey from that cultural milieu to entering these broader spiritual fields, including the goddess and the divine feminine, all these concepts, and kind of what that journey was for her. And so I think for me, what I liked about it, she and I come from a bit different spiritual backgrounds. I was also raised in the church, but it wasn't fundamentalist or conservative or anything like that. But it was the Christian culture in the sense of embedded with patriarchal norms and patriarchal understanding of God. So I could identify with her coming from that perspective. And I also just had this hunger. I think for me, so much of my books I seek out and learning and growing is driven from this hunger, and it's a spiritual hunger to just broaden my own understanding of the divine and what that is. And so she shares a similar hunger and also a willingness to question systems she was raised in. And so it was just helpful hearing her own personal journey. And yeah.
Book number 10, The Globalisation of God, Celtic Christianity's Nemesis by Dara Malloy, published in 2015. And you had the pleasure of meeting this author.
I did. So that makes this book a little bit special because there was a personal connection. I did this Celtic pilgrimage to Ireland about 12 years ago, and this was with a group of people. And so during one of the days on this pilgrimage, we went to this island where this author lives. It's right off the coast of Ireland. I don't remember the name of it, but anyway, he lives there. Kind of, it's very remote. He lives this kind of mystic author or teacher life. He used to be a priest in the Catholic Church, and I think he excommunicated himself, if I remember correctly, from that institution. And he's one of those people that you meet and you just don't forget. And for me, I didn't forget him because he really embodied the energy of love in a way that I've never experienced anyone else, to a higher degree than I've experienced anyone else embody it. And so that makes me automatically want to listen to whatever he's saying, And so anyway, on this island, we did a day of kind of pilgrimage to different sacred sites on the island. There are rituals he did around some of the sites that he led the group through, but he mentioned this book he'd written. So I bought the book, and then on the plane ride home, read the book. And it's not an easy read. It's a bit, dense. But again, it's because he's giving a very kind of in-depth historical look at the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, but particularly how that intersected with the demise really of Celtic spirituality in Ireland at the time. And those are obviously his roots. I have ancestral roots in that region, so that's part of my interest in Celtic spirituality. But it was a very helpful, just historical look at what actually happened, how the Roman Catholic Church rose to power, and in the process of doing so, stamped out all local expressions of spirituality, didn't allow for anything that wasn't under the authority of like the head person. I guess that's the Pope in Rome, or, all of that. The top-down authority structure, again, very patriarchal. And so the book looked at more than just that, but that was the main focus. And so it just gave an interesting historical context, especially as I mentioned earlier with Sue Monk Kidd's book, on this journey of looking for the feminine side of God and really wanting to uncover and excavate that. Well, he does a very good job of talking about how it was kind of buried. And so it was just a helpful tool, again, and just broadening spiritual mindsets and spiritual understanding, but rooted in like factual history of what has happened.
Have any of these 10 books had a real direct influence on your art, or something that you were working on at the time?
I don't know if I would say that any have had like an overt influence in terms of me creating something specifically in response to the book. But I would say, especially like Julia Cameron's book, it was, I would say that book was really like the incubator for allowing the baby to be born, and the baby being my artistic identity. So without that book, it wouldn't have come forth. So in I guess a more indirect way.
If you had the opportunity to sit down for a lengthy dinner with any one of these authors, who would you choose?
I'd love to talk to Dara Malloy, the Irish gentleman who wrote this book on Celtic spirituality, and just because he's one of these, like, I don't know if it's a prerequisite. You have to go live on an island somewhere and become remote, and then you become this wise mystic soul that people want to seek out. Maybe I should try that. But he struck me as that, and so it's like you don't meet many people like that, that really. I don't know. He left an indelible impression on me. So I would love to talk with him and just hear about his
life. Do you just want to, do you have a specific question in mind, or do you just want to shoot the breeze and hang on his wisdom?
Probably the latter. Although I'm sure if I had the opportunity to sit down with him, I would think of a specific question. I'd be curious to know what his spiritual expression is now. I mean, I love people's journeys in the spiritual realm in terms of there's a million different streams you can swim in. So I really gravitate towards people that have swum in many streams, and what that's like for them. Because I just think you get a broader, more multifaceted view on something that's infinite. So he's someone who's obviously done that, and those kind of people, really interest me.
So let's talk about you and your work. For over 20 years, you've practiced and studied contemplative spirituality, and you say that this is the basis from which your creativity is birthed. Tell me a little bit about how the work that you do, because, people think an artist, oh, they're a painter. I'll see their pictures hanging in a gallery or something. But the art that you do is quite diverse, and it's quite large too in some cases, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm a mixed media artist. But when I started out, the first art I made was collages. So those are all very small scale, for something you could frame and hang on a wall. And I like paper and lots of mixing different materials. So that's where I began. But I also really liked books. This was long before I began writing or calling myself a writer. So perhaps that was a foreshadowing of my becoming an author. But I actually would like collecting old books and then deconstructing them, cutting them up or then reconfiguring them in some kind of different.
Blasphemy.
I know. So that was a fun thing in LA. I would often go to the library, would have like a free book cart and I liked older books in particular, meaning published before 1960, let's say, because the colors of the covers would be different and the feel and look would be different than more books of today. So it fit my aesthetic that I was going for. But anyway, exploring book materials led me to building kind of larger installation type pieces, some of them larger scale. And I'm a very tactile person. So I'm not a painter. I have painted a few murals as public art projects because public art appeals to me from my social work background, just because it's democratic and accessible. But I don't call myself a painter in terms of my medium. I'm really much more drawn to being a mixed media artist with lots of different materials going on.
And you've said that, you desire to use a multitude of creative mediums as vessels for truth and beauty. How are you defining that? I mean, how do you know when you have created something that portrays truth or beauty? How do you know that? Is it a feeling? Is it a
Yeah, I'd say it's more an energetic awareness, because it's not a literal thing, because I don't paint, say, a picture of Mother Teresa, or I don't know, think of an example of goodness or beauty. I don't paint literal things or create things that are literal. That's all abstract images. So it's really more an energetic, it's very much the release of energy. And I think, you know, so if you think about, we're obviously bombarded with visuals all day long, but some visuals will make you feel, like a moment of calm or peace or something positive, and others you'll want to turn away from because they're disturbing. So again, that's just referring to the energy that's being released. And so one example, a specific example of this, when I did do a public mural project in Santa Monica, California, I used to live there. And that experience every day gave me experiences of what I'm talking about in terms of what energy something is releasing. In terms of people, their response, their demeanor would change when they walk by. I would have cars drive by and someone would shout out like, "Thank you for what you're doing." Or just, you could feel that something was shifting in them when they looked at the art that was going up on the wall. And it was just an abstract design. Again, it wasn't like a picture of an angel or something. But people responded to it. And there was this one man in particular, this homeless man, and he had camped out like under the mural. And so when I walked over there to begin working for that day, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like, he was apologetic. "I'll move him." And I'm like, "That's okay, you know." And he said, "Oh, I just like the energy coming from here." And, you know, just shared like how it touched him, like, you know, sitting under the mural. And I said, "Oh, I mean, I was like, that's great." It kind of took me aback. I wasn't quite sure how to respond, but I guess just having experiences like that, that's part of what motivates me, that even if something's not overt or explicit in what it's communicating, it can still just energetically either have a positive or negative impact. So I guess that's what I mean when I write about my desire to express truth and beauty through what I create.
So tell us about the writing part. Had you always had a secret hankering to be a writer, or is it something that emerged?
Oh, I'd say it emerged because, you know, as a kid, I did always write when I was a kid in terms of processing life. Like, I kept a diary. And so that's always been a part of my just processing what I'm living through. But the writing is like a thing. I didn't enjoy writing in school. I actually found the writing projects I was required to do quite laborious, and they were actually difficult for me. So I didn't, by the time I finished school, I didn't think like, oh, I should be a writer. I didn't enjoy writing in school. So in that sense, it was, I guess, more of an emerging thing. I didn't really think about it as a path to pursue until I wrote my first blog. I began a blog kind of early on in my art career just to document what I was doing, and would often have posts that weren't just photos, but would involve me writing my thoughts on something. And I really enjoyed that. So I think that was the first seed of like, oh, like there's a form of writing I do enjoy. And then it grew over time. But yeah, it was definitely more of a slow emergence. And it's still, back to the ownership of identity we touched on earlier. I can call myself a writer and an author now, but it took me a while. Like, even with the first book, after the first book, I still struggled to call myself fully an author. So yeah, it's been an emergence.
Well, judging by the title of your first book, you also struggled to call yourself an artist, didn't you? I mean, the reluctant artist.
Yes. Although, yes, that was definitely a journey, owning the art part. But I would say that word reluctance, I chose more to illustrate that the fact that pursuing whatever our life calling isn't always easy. So it was more the extreme realism side of me being like, because a lot of times people, the vernacular around seizing one's dreams is just that, like seizing your dreams and let's pursue our destiny, as if it's all fun and games. And I'm like, well, there's also a struggle involved in embracing your vocation. So yes, I chose the word reluctant to kind of define that a little bit.
Mm. So how does your second book differ? Doorways to Transformation, Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul. How is that different than the first book?
Mm-hmm. I'd say this book is more of a marriage between creativity and spirituality. So I do include many chapters on the creative process, but also go beyond that to looking at kind of just transformational moments in everyday life and looking at topics that can relate to creativity, but go beyond it, so things like abundance and gratitude, being in the unknown, embracing transitions. So I feel like this book is more applicable to perhaps a broader audience. The first book, I think, really be more in the niche audience of people who define themselves as creative. But this book, I think, can go much farther beyond, because it's really looking at embracing transformation in our daily lives in a kind of a wide array of subjects. And so people who aren't necessarily creative, I think, can still benefit from just the meditative journey that I invite readers to.
I mean, you're a freelance writer. You have articles and essays published in a number of magazines and newspapers. What sort of things inspire you to write? What sort of essays do you write?
Yeah, I think most of the inspiration, a lot of the inspiration for essays comes from just what's happening in my current life. And so when I first moved to Mexico, a lot of the things I wrote centered around things I was experiencing here, and also just the, extreme polarization between some of the rhetoric coming out of the US at the time regarding Mexico, and certainly migrants and all of that. And so being in a different cultural milieu has given me a lot of fodder for that kind of writing. But I really like to move into, more spiritual kinds of writing. Some things there's another book down the road I'd like to write centering around the divine feminine and kind of the feminine spiritual journey, and how that is really quite different than a masculine one. And so I'd love to start writing, again, just shorter essays around that topic and moving in that direction. So we'll see.
So you do a quarterly newsletter, don't you, on the divine feminine, exploring spirituality and transformation from a feminist perspective?
Mm-hmm.
How long have you been doing that?
Let's see, 2 years. Yeah, so not very long. And but it's been it's kind of where my creative impulses are taking me, partly in preparation for a third book that I would like to write. It's kind of a fun way of just beginning to research the topic, but it's also just a way of kind of giving a platform for women's voices and also their creative voices. So, I will often write something that goes in the newsletter, but then I also include either poetry from women, their own reflections, or pieces of art that relate to the divine feminine. So it's really been fun. It's been a fun way to connect with other women, give a platform to their voices, and also just begin to plant seeds of my own. Like, what do I want to say and write about this topic someday in a book form?
So are you now a writer and an artist, and you are continuing to do both equally, or is one taking over from the other?
I'd say writing is taking over. Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
Yes, it is good in the sense it feels like it's the right season for me to be in. I feel like there's untapped things to say that for me that can only come out via writing. The things I need to say can't really be said via art in the same way. And so, it feels very timely. The writing, and also just beginning to share about my writing and teach and that kind of thing, feels very much like the next part of my life. So that's why I'd say where more of my focus and energy is going. Although in art at this point in time, art for me, making art is more of for myself, but I'm not doing as much with the public display of exhibiting work at this time, because the writing and teaching seems to be the predominant voice calling right now.
And how much is Mexico inspiring your writing and your art? I mean, you talked about the differences, that you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. What else?
Well, I think it's definitely, it's given me perspective on my creative path. I'll say that. It's very much helped me allow for the unfolding of whether it's the next book, the writing. I think being away from a culture that's where you're always kind of on a treadmill and pushing for the next thing. And it's hard to, even if you should take a break from the treadmill, it's very difficult. Whereas I find here, there does not appear to be a treadmill. It's a different value system. But I would say a lot of what I've experienced is a much more feminine value system here that very much allows for life to be a process, for things to unfold. What really matters is our connections to other people, and not so much on what have we produced in the world. So it's a different emphasis, but I find it's very nurturing of my creative work. It's because I'm not good at allowing process. I'm a very internally kind of driven person. I like executing, like checking tasks off my list. I get great satisfaction from doing that. So the whole like this being in process and allowing, and I've grown in those things, but I would say Mexican culture has really helped facilitate that growth more deeply. It's really ushered me into a new way of being.
Yes.
That's hard to describe until I'm back in the States, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I see more clearly the way of being I've been ushered into.
It's very interesting, isn't it, when you leave, the culture, the places that you grew up with, that and go into a completely different culture. When you go back, there's a whole other perspective that you have. You're looking through a different lens at, what you had before. And it can be quite shocking in some cases and also disappointing.
Yes.
Because suddenly you think, I idealized that place. And in fact, I'm not very impressed.
Yeah, definitely. You see it with a whole new objectivity and more clearly. I mean, I agree. I really think it does take leaving wherever it is, and then returning to really see clearly. So,
So tell me, what are you reading now?
The book I'm beginning to work through is called When God Was a Black Woman. Or maybe it's called God is a Black Woman. I forget her tense, if it was present or past. And I'm blanking on the author's name. I wish I had that for you. But I heard her, a description of her book through Mirabai Starr, another author I've been influenced by, who I enjoy quite a bit. She had recommended Christina is her first name, and it'll maybe come to me what her last name is, of the author of When God is a Black Woman. But she is, an African-American woman, and writes about her journey of embracing God as a Black woman and what that is for her. And so it's been an interesting, I'm only just beginning it, but I'm curious to see what she has to say.
Karen Kinney, thank you so much for sharing your 10 best list of books with the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. It's good to have your list there.
Sure. Thank you, Sandie. I'm so glad we could chat today. It was fun.
Me too. Okay, so Karen's books and manual, hang on. Doorways to Transformation, Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul, and The Reluctant Artist, Navigating and Sustaining a Creative Path. They're obviously available at online stores, and you can also go to Karen's website and learn a little bit more about them. You can also see some of your art there, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. I know that you used to do some teaching. Are you doing any teaching now?
Well, I'm doing some speaking, like speaking at different groups, mostly about my book at this point in time.
Okay.
So there are more speaking engagements. I have done some teaching on my first book. And so I'm looking forward to doing some more of that around this book and creating some content to teach.
And will you keep people informed about that if you are going to go ahead and do any events?
Yeah, definitely. There's my website is KarenKinney.com, and on there at the bottom of the homepage is a place to sign up for newsletters, and through that I would announce any events or upcoming things that people need to know about.
Good. Karen Kinney, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me.